I think I can speak for all people who have ever existed when I say that dragons are pretty cool. They're the one common denominator between my YouTube content now and the stuff I made when I was first getting into the platform. Shout out if you've been watching since the D&D days. With that said, George R. R. Martin's dragons in particular are fascinating. They don't speak like the dragons of Tolkien, they're animalistic, and what's more, they have other fantastical elements to them. There are other layers of magic beyond just being a lizard that breathes fire, and there are a number of hints sprinkled throughout the text and the histories as to the potential origins of this massive species of lizards. Today, I'd like to examine a number of those hints and figure out exactly how they might fit together and how the origin of dragons may play a role in the future of A Song of Ice and Fire and House of the Dragon. We have two distinct points of insight into the world of Ice and Fire where we can see dragons in action on page and on screen. The first of these is in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Daenerys Targaryen is called the Mother of Dragons, and for good reason. These creatures were extinct for 180 years, and she brought 3 petrified eggs onto a pyre, burning herself in the process and giving birth to these 3 dragons and essentially bringing life back to a species that was long thought extinct. While this does very much relight the magic of the world, it seems, we don't really get any further insight into how dragons might have originally been created. These eggs did exist as dragons previously, but old age had petrified them, and it seems as though their actual process of being born had been interrupted. This does give some insight into the potential morphology and biology of dragons, insofar as their eggs can go dormant, it seems, but it really doesn't seem to be anything further than that in terms of their actual origins of this species. Our second point of insight is House of the Dragon. As the title of the show would imply, these creatures are plentiful during this time period. The Dance, which is the war that starts at the beginning of Season 2, has 18 dragons active at its beginning, and some fewer than that afterwards. I will not get into spoilers. Specifically, the main bulk of what we learn from this show comes from actually seeing riders and their dragons in action, and seeing some of the broader historical and cultural notes that just kind of act as set dressing or background for several scenes, which I'll get to in a minute. Before we get into that, I do want to go into some broader historical texts within the universe itself and look at some of the theories that exist therein as to the origin of dragons. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, and House of the Dragon all the time, and I really appreciate any and all support, and I do hope that you would enjoy future videos on those topics. Back to the topic at hand. Most of this insight comes from an in-universe book called An Unnatural History by a guy named Septon Barth. This man was a hand of the king to Jaehaerys the First Targaryen, one of the greatest kings this dynasty ever knew, and I would say the one Septon that I would trust with my life. He tells of a number of tales of the dragon's origins, a number of which do have elements of truth, it seems. The main one he cites is that Valyrians claim that dragons were discovered by them from the 14 Flames, which is a series of volcanoes that existed just south of this massive empire. It seems as though they weren't that large when they initially discovered dragons, but this discovery and the discovery of how to bond with these creatures did allow them to massively expand their empire into this world's kind of Rome equivalent. There's also another tale from Karth, which says that there was at one point a second moon in the sky, and that moon cracked open and 1,000,000 dragons came out as though it was an egg. While this doesn't sound quite accurate, there is some interesting element that could be true here. This seems to at least somewhat resemble what we see in House of the Dragon in terms of dragons giving birth. We see these clutches of eggs that are cracked open to remove the individual eggs before more dragons are removed from that. So the idea of cracking something open in order to remove the way to get dragons does seem to ring true to this method of birthing dragons, even if they didn't actually come from the moon, unfortunately. Moving away from myths and fairy tales, Septon Barth begins to put forth ideas of his own, theories as to the origins of these supernatural creatures. Specifically, he postulates that Valyrians may have made dragons themselves. On a continent far south of Westeros and Essos known as Sithorios, creatures known as wyverns exist. They seem to occur naturally, and they're these flying lizards not unlike dragons, but far smaller, and they don't breathe fire, and they're not generally as powerful. The Valyrians are known to have experimented with dark sorcery and blood magic, so Barth postulates that perhaps wyverns could have been combined with some other creature to create what we now know as dragons, these massive magical beasts. Septon Barth stops there, not speculating on what creatures might have been combined with wyverns in order to create this final draconic product. However, there are two sources from which we can pull where there is some evidence as to what other creatures might have been combined with wyverns in order to create dragons. Similarly to the big guy from Jurassic World whose name I forget and am not going to look up right now. First of these is these fireworms that we learn about in Fire and Blood. When Princess Arya Targaryen escapes on Valerion and goes off who knows where for a year, she returns, assumedly from the Valyrian Freehold, as that's pretty much the only place in the known world where she could have gone and not been seen by anyone else. When she returns, she's very sick, infested by these massive parasites, some of which are as long as the Septon's arm itself. These creatures breathe fire and seem to come alive in the heat and die in the cold. It seems as though the fiery elements of dragons could have been derived from these creatures, or from creatures similar to these that may have resided in the 14 Flames, similarly to the Valyrian myths as to the origins of dragons. Once combined with wyverns, we get a creature that has wings and does in fact breathe fire. But there is one more element that I think might be at play here. One more element that could account for the magical bond that takes place between rider and dragon. One additional element that could account for dragons' seemingly advanced intelligence from some instances we've heard in the book. Specifically, I think that there is some evidence that humans were involved in the creation of dragons, not just as the makers, but as test subjects. The main evidence for this idea comes from some background art in House of the Dragons. Would you like to look at the tapestries? In the background of the Red Keep, throughout the first, I think, 4 or 5 episodes, we see these tapestries depicting a number of very strange scenes. For the sake of not getting demonetized on YouTube, I'm not going to fully describe what exactly is happening there, but it seems as though some sort of relation is happening between humans and dragons. The Valyrians are known to be slavers and to experiment on humans at different points in their history. There are these lemurs that exist that are called little Valyrians that are speculated to also be related to these humans who were experimented on by Valyrians. It seems as though dragons might have had an element of humanity in them as well. This could tie into why exactly the dragons are able to understand and bond with people. Through having the same, at least, core element as well, that could be from where the Valyrians derive some of their supernatural abilities, the ability to bond with these dragons and to be at least semi-resistant to fire, although not all Valyrians are fireproof. Please stop thinking that. While the bond between Rider and Dragon is something that's mostly speculated on, we don't have a lot of hard evidence for, there are some examples of a concrete bond taking place. The best example of which I remember jumping off of my couch when I saw on House of the Dragon episode 3, I believe it was. Daemon gets shot in the shoulder by an arrow, and it's Caraxes who ends up screaming in pain and writhing. It seems as though he felt his rider's pain rather than having any just reaction to something that happened, because I don't think Caraxes would have been able to even see that. The magical bond that takes place between a rider and its dragon seems to allow for only those two individuals to ride together, at least while the other is alive. And I think that it does very much make sense that some additional magical element could be at play there. While that might not be humans themselves, it does seem like at least some form of Valyrian magic took place in the creation of dragons to allow for them to be these weapons of war. For me, there's one key detail that seals the fact that dragons seem to be made from wyverns, from fireworms, and from humans. Throughout Targaryen history, we hear one key phrase repeated over and over again. It's not their words, fire and blood. It's something that's prophetic, something that seems to have ties both to the future and to the past. The dragon has 3 heads. This seems to be an indication of maybe 3 individuals will save the world from the White Walkers. Maybe 3 dragons will save the world from White Walkers. Maybe it refers to Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys conquering Westeros. Or maybe it's older than that. Maybe it's an old Valyrian saying referring to the 3 heads that were used in experimentation to create the dragon: the head of the fireworm, the head of the wyvern, and the head of man. There is evidence to support the idea that this song dates back to Old Valyria, specifically within the song sung by Daemon to Vermithor in the season finale of Season 1 of House of the Dragon. It speaks of the 3 heads and the mystical bond between rider and dragon. This seems to indicate that this idea is far older than the Targaryens themselves, and could tie back even to the creation of these creatures themselves. What do you think? How do you think dragons were created, and how do you think they'll play a role in the future of the series? I really appreciate any support on this video. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that typical YouTube stuff. It does really help me grow the channel, and it just really makes me feel good, and it's nice to see that people like what I'm doing, if you like what I'm doing. I hope you like what I'm doing. I do hope to have many more videos out for you in the near future. There are a couple projects I'm working on as well, but this was something that I just kind of had the spark of inspiration for, wanted to go with. The 2 videos that were on the polls will be out soon. Specifically, the Greyjoy analysis should be the next one after this, and I look forward to getting that out and getting all of your insights in it. I just need to do some research in it because it covers some topics about which I'm not really an expert. But yeah, I'm still very excited for that one. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day or night or whatever time it is when you're watching this right now. Thank you again. Goodbye.